So Nationals is upon us, let's talk about the format. Hey guys, Otaka here, back with another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier list video. So the national season is very close to being upon us. Many other countries have already started doing their nationals, and ours is very soon. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm pretty bored of the current Legacy of Destruction format, and I'm just ready for Infinite Forbidden and Nationals format. Because even though I'm not personally going to be playing at Nationals because I didn't get my invite, because I suck at this game, there's still a lot of amazing things coming out of Infinite Forbidden, and the format is going to see a massive change in where it's going. Not to mention, between now and then, we'll be seeing Battle of Legends Terminal Revenge, which will also be bringing out the Ice Barrier, Infernoid, and Sky Striker support. So today, I want to kind of talk about where the format is going and what the top decks of the format are going to be looking like. And just overall, we're going to be just discussing what those decks are going to be capable of. But also, since this is a Nationals tier list, I'm of course going to be talking about what decks I think are most likely to be topping at Nationals. But before we do go ahead and jump into the tier list, I have noticed that a great deal of you that watch my videos are not subscribed to this channel, and if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, I would seriously recommend doing so. And also be sure to hit that bell button for future notifications on future videos I upload. But with that, let's just jump into the tier list. So for the decks that will be kind of performing well in the format, but also just want to highlight decks that will still be getting played regardless if they are doing well in the format, are kind of what you see right here on the board. And it is without a doubt to say that the decks to beat are going to be the Tenpai Dragons and the Snake Eyes, but specifically Snake Eye Fiendsmith. So Fiendsmith is a new archetype that will be released in Infinite Forbidden, and it is essentially just a one-card combo engine that turbos out rank 6s. And the rank 6 that they are consistently summoning out is Beatrice. Just having the power to Foolish Burial any card from your deck to your graveyard, even on your opponent's turn, is very powerful. And like I said, this engine can do it in just one card. And it is because of this that this engine is going to be played in pretty much any deck that can fit it. Snake Eyes, of course, being the top contender because Snake Eyes will abuse any engine that it possibly can. We are even seeing some success in the OCG with the Millennium engine as well, because it just turbos out bodies. Tenpai, of course, will be getting its new support. It's getting the new trap card, which is okay, but it is also getting its equivalent to Snake Eyes Poplar, which when it's added from deck to hand, it can special summon itself and raise its level by 1 and make itself a tuner. Not to mention, on top of that, they're getting that little baby dragon support card, which just essentially lets you add the Snake Eye Poplar Tenpai Dragon guy to hand. This is only further going to make Tenpai even better, even as a going first strategy. So it's just going to make it a lot more consistent, and because of that, Tenpai is just going to continue to reign over every other deck other than Snake Eyes, where it will be competing for the best deck in the room. Now that we have the best two decks in the format out of the way, we're going to be talking about the meta contenders, the decks that can still clutch out a win against the best decks in the room as long as the players are actually playing well. We, of course, still have, like, the Fire King Snake Eye. Fire King Snake Eye is kind of one of those decks that has slowly been drifting away because it's just point blank period, Snake Eye Pure is way better. But obviously the Snake Eye Fire King build is still fairly consistent. It bricks a lot more, but it is still fairly consistent. Then we're going to move a little further on down the list. We are going to be talking about the Gimmick Puppets. So Gimmick Puppet is a deck that's been out for a while. However, it's getting brand new support in the Infinite Forbidden set, and its new support allows it to FTK. For those who don't know what an FTK is, it's a first turn kill. It's when you go first and you kill your opponent before they even get a turn in the game, aka a very toxic strategy. And the FTK is very consistent, especially if they get the field spell on board, because the field spell makes it basically that all of your Gimmick Puppet monsters are untouchable unless your opponent's using an Xyz monster's effect, which obviously if it's the first turn, that's not going to happen. The deck also plays with level 8s very consistently, so the deck in the OCG is seeing a lot of success with the Horus engine, which can also turbo out rank 8s, which only further makes it so that the deck, if it doesn't FTK, can set up a very powerful board, so that way, you know, it can still fight if your opponent actually gets a turn. I don't think Gimmick Puppet is going to be one of the best decks in the room by any means, but it is going to be a deck to respect because it's going to have an FTK strategy that's incredibly consistent, which is why I think it's going to be a meta contender, at least at the beginning of Infinite Forbidden's format, where people are still trying to figure out what the cards do. But that being said, we have also already seen that Gimmick Puppet is going to be getting even further support in the next core set that is coming out in the OCG, meaning that this deck is probably here to stay for a little bit. Another fire deck that has kind of fallen into irrelevancy, of course, is Rescue Ace. It's a very good, powerful fire deck, and if Snake Eye ever gets butchered to death, I think the community is going to kind of gravitate back towards the Rescue Ace deck because it is very powerful. It is just not as powerful as Snake Eye. That being said, Snake Eye Rescue Ace or Sinful Spoils Rescue Ace is a deck that some fans are still playing, and because of that, I think it's still very powerful in the format. It just can't keep up with Snake Eyes itself. Then, of course, we have Labyrinth. Labyrinth Fiendsmith is also going to be a thing. I didn't put up the image here. It's a Fiendsmith deck. Now, granted, the links require light fiends and the Labyrinth monsters are dark fiends, but regardless, it still works, especially since summoning Beatrice in fucking Labyrinth is incredibly powerful because Beatrice can dump transaction rollback. It can dump plenty of other things that Labyrinth wants in the graveyard. Beatrice in Labyrinth is terrifying. And Labyrinth has already been a meta contender for the last little while. It's getting a lot of tops as of late, and just being able to give it a one-card combo engine that can summon out Beatrice and make their graveyard plays a lot more viable is very powerful. Then, of course, we have Voiceless Voice. Now, Voiceless Voice is getting support in Infinite Forbidden. However, the support is dog shit. The support lets you summon out the vanilla Skull Guardian, which means you're going to have to play the vanilla Skull Guardian, which is just a Garnet, and you're not going to want to do that. That being said, Voiceless Voice, even if it doesn't play its new support, is still a very powerful deck, especially being played with the Melodious engine. The Voiceless Voice deck sets up very powerful end boards that can have like 2 Omni Negates and an Appaloosa and plenty of other interaction with your opponent. That's going to be hard to break that board. Not to mention, the deck has a lot of recursion with Blessing being able to grab from the Banish pile or the graveyard, and then Old Man Cerevis being able to shuffle back your ritual spells back into your deck, so that way they're not gone for good. The deck just has very good grind game, and because of this, it's still going to be one of the best decks in the room. Moving on to Yubel, we have Pure Yubel, which it's getting its new support, hopefully in Terminal's Revenge with Phantom Yubel, which will make the deck very powerful, but also kind of make it so Yubel can even be an engine. The deck is just going to be very good at putting out bodies, getting Yubel on the board, and also just setting up a very consistent board that's going to force your opponent to attack your Yubel monsters if possible, and also just allow you to let your opponent OTK themselves. That being said, because it's Yubel's, of course, the Fiendsmith engine can be played in this as well. Now, the Fiendsmith engine of Yubel is, of course, going to be the meta contender. It's going to be the version of the deck that is going to see the most success because, again, Beatrice, you can use it to dump your Yubel monsters in the graveyard, and because of that, you can kind of get some recursion going. But also, Yubel as pure is going to be a meta contender as well. If you don't have to run the Fiendsmith cards with this, if Phantom Yubel does come out by Nationals, which hopefully it does, there's no confirmation it's in Terminal Revenge, this is where we think it's going to be, then Yubel will, of course, see a major source of success. Now, I think pure Yubel, if we don't have Phantom Yubel by then, we'll see a lot less success, but Fiendsmith Yubel will still be very powerful, and to the point where I think it can still be a meta contender. The last of the meta contenders I want to talk about is going to be Memento. Memento came out in Valiant Smashers, and it got support in, I believe, Phantom Nightmare or Legacy, I can't remember which one, and it is getting even more support in Infinite Forbidden. Up until about now, the deck has done okay things. It's not terrible. It's seen a lot more success in Master Duel, but the upcoming support is actually pretty cracked. The upcoming support makes it so the deck kind of has a lot of interaction on your opponent's turn. It can make a Little Knight, which can let you, of course, do plenty of things on your opponent's turn. It has 3 pops on your opponent's turn, and just a bunch of other amazing interactions. The deck has seen quite a bit of success in the OCG with its new support. Of course, it is by no means the best deck in the room, but it is able to put up a good fight against the best decks. That being said, I think it is the bottom of the meta contenders, and to the point where it probably would require a very good pilot to do very good things. Moving on to the good pilots, the first one I want to talk about is going to be Pearly. Pearly is a fan favorite deck, one of my favorites of all time, and it is a very powerful deck that even has OTK potential now that Delicious Memory is up to 2. The problem is that it has a hard time playing through several points of interaction in a format that only has several points of interaction in every opening hand. Obviously, if you have the field spell on board, you can't really be affected by Mourner or Veiler as long as you special summon your Pearlies, but Ash Blossom, Joyous Spring, and even Droll Knockbird are still very much a thing. But the deck still, of course, sets up a very powerful and untouchable towers that just makes it so it's hard for your opponent to really do anything and interact with you. There are many points in the game where a Pearly player can just sit on a 5 material Noir and just kind of chill because your opponent doesn't have a way to out it. But also, that being said, Fiendsmith engine will be able to search Santa Claus, which is just a kaiju essentially. So if Pearly at any point saw success in the Infinite Forbidden format, the Fiendsmith engine would of course check that. But at the same time, Pearly is one of those decks that doesn't want to be the best deck in the room, because it is one of those decks that if people are preparing for it, it's not going to do very well. But if people are not preparing for it, it's going to catch them off guard. Which is why I think having a good pilot behind this deck is going to be the best position this deck can be in this format. We're going to talk about Runic Stun next. Runic Stun, again, I think needs a good pilot. It needs someone to manage its resources better, but also it is possible we will see another ban list before Nationals. And if that ban list ends up hitting Skill Drain, which is the last remaining floodgate in the game that hasn't been hit, then this deck will see a lot less success. We've seen it at plenty of YCSs recently where the feature match showed Runic Stun, and if the deck didn't see Skill Drain, the deck just didn't play. Now, I'm not saying Skill Drain is doing all the heavy lifting, but it is certainly a very contributing factor. But I think if this deck still has a good pilot, Runic Stun can still see pretty good success at Nationals. Next, we're going to talk about the Fiendsmith Chimera. So since the birth and dawn of the Chimera archetype, I have talked about this entire archetype in a whole different video, which the link will be in the description below if you haven't seen it already. But Chimera, for the most part, has been run with the branded engine, and I think now that it has its new support from Legacy of Destruction, and with the Fiendsmith cards coming out in the Infinite Forbidden, this deck as a pure archetype is going to be a lot better. Even without the Fiendsmith cards, the deck has the potential to make Beatrice, having the ability to turbo out level 6s, which can in turn make rank 6s, but also just having the Fiendsmith cards do the heavy lifting for you has just made it so this deck can actually do some very good things. In the current Chimera build, to make the rank 6s, you have to use your Chimera fusions, aka Baphomet or Chimera, to make a rank 6, meaning that you don't have Mirror Sword Knight or Kotal live until you use the Chimera effects in the graveyard to revive Chimera. So for the most part, your interaction is shut off once you make Beatrice. Obviously, this isn't like a big deal, but being able to just kind of make Beatrice with the Fiendsmith engine and then still keep your Baphomet or your Chimera live on the board so your negates in the graveyard can still be live is a lot better. Not to mention, this deck can still summon out Diabells, which just shuts off all spells and traps until, of course, they can be flipped. And then being able to summon out like Dark Statue or plenty of other just cards that can lock your opponent out of the game is just very powerful, and Beatrice only further makes that possible by dumping those cards in the graveyard on your opponent's turn. But that being said, Chimera still has some very glaring problems, the biggest one being Droll and Lockbird. This deck does a lot of adding because it is a fusion deck that doesn't fuse from the deck, so they gotta add their resources to the hand, and if you get Drolled, it hurts a lot. And the deck runs a lot of cards that kind of play into Droll, like Fight for Patchwork, and even the Fiendsmith cards play into Droll and Lockbird, so if you get Drolled at a really bad point and you just don't have the correct resources, you're in a big problem. Now, Chimera itself only requires a Fiend, and so does Baphomet, so it doesn't require a Light Fiend or a Dark Fiend, so you can use the Fiendsmith cards to make the Chimera fusions. But because of Droll and Lockbird, like I said, this deck's going to need a good pilot. Also, it just hurts to plenty of other interactions. If the deck gets hit with like 2 hand traps, it usually crumbles. They can Ash the Mirror Sword Knight, they can Ash Gazelle or Baphomet, they can Ash the Fusion Baphomet, they can Imperm any of the fusions and just kind of make it hard to play with that, because if they get Imperm, they're no longer Chimera on the board, but also Kotal kind of protects from the targeting. But the deck has a lot of problems, and too many interactions will make the deck hurt. So this deck's going to definitely need a very good pilot to do well at Nationals. Next is Kashtira. Kashtira is just a deck that won't die. It's just a meta contending deck that I think as the format continues to evolve, Kashtira is slowly fading out. Because it's just becoming more of a rogue strategy. It's a control deck at this point. You summon Fenrir, you summon Unicorn, and you just hope your opponent plays into them so you can eat their extra deck and banish their resources. Not to mention, rank 7 Turbo is actually like really powerful. And they can also just summon Heat Soul so they can draw 2 cards, draw into their non-engine to have more points of interaction. Like I said, the deck is powerful, and I think it's just going to need a good pilot to, again, do well at National. Melodious is a deck that I think right now still needs a good pilot. It's like a tier 2 strategy right now because it just does good things, and also their fusion monster allows them to banish cards from the graveyard as essentially a quick effect, so that way Snake Eyes can't do certain things, but also they have the ability to bounce shit back to your opponent's hand, so a well-timed effect from that card just allows you to just go fucking nuts. That being said, I think the deck's not amazing. I think the engine is better, but even then the engine kind of creates problems. Again, I made a video on the entire Melodious engine and my thoughts on it last week, so also link will be in the description below for that one. Next is going to be the Centurions. Centurion Fiendsmith to be exact, because Centurion's already doing like pretty good things. It's just able to turbo out Calamity. My buddy at the Greenville Regional played the Tenpai deck, however he had a smokescreen side deck with Centurion in it. So basically, if he won the die roll, he would go second, play Tenpai, and then his opponent would, of course, would make him go first, and then he Calamity locks on game 2. The deck is just incredibly consistent at Calamity locking, but also it has good strategies even going second. And not to mention, the Fiendsmith cards make it so your opponent has to kind of interact with the Fiendsmith cards. But making rank 6s, like again, Beatrice, is very powerful. You can technically make Lars for a negate. The deck just is further influenced by that. But that being said, Centurion does crumble under like 2 or 3 interactions. It just struggles to play through all that. So that's why I think it's going to, again, need a good pilot, even with the Fiendsmith cards being able to kind of bait out some of the interactions, so that way the Centurion cards can play untouched, is a lot better. I just, again, think it's going to need a good pilot to see a lot of success, but we will see this deck for sure. As for the remaining decks, we're going to ignore the Diabells because her picture's not supposed to be here, but the remaining decks are going to kind of be a struggle bus. Branded is a fan favorite deck, so of course we will see it at Nationals format. It is a deck that can play through several points of interaction and still be able to set up the puppet lock, which is, of course, still a strategy. And the problem is that we are kind of in a format that is ruled by one-card combos, and Branded, as a inherent fusion deck, just by default is not a one-card combo deck. Now, many would argue Branded Fusion is a one-card combo, but it realistically isn't. And like I said, Branded can play through 3 to 4 points of interaction, whether it's like Veiler, Ash, Imperm, Mourner, Ghost Bell. It can play through a lot of that, but doesn't mean it likes to. Not to mention, Branded doesn't have the best strategy against Tenpai, who does play all those points of interaction, and Branded crumbles under Pearly specifically. I just don't foresee Branded doing a lot of amazing things in this upcoming format. Now, that's not to say it won't see success. I just think, as the tier says, it's going to be a struggle bus. They are going to struggle to see success, and it's going to need more than a good pilot. It's going to need someone that knows the deck inside and out, every point of interaction, and it might even come down to the matchups. Branded Chimera, now that I've played Pure Chimera and I've played Branded Chimera, I've come to the realization that I think Pure Chimera is just a lot better. We are in a format that plays D-Barrier, which is another reason why Branded won't see a lot of success, because D-Barrier is fucking everywhere. And it's because of this that D-Barrier kind of shuts out even the Branded Chimera deck, because again, it locks itself into fusions, whereas Pure Chimera has the flexibility to play Lynx and Xyz as well, and even play Chaos Angel. But even if D-Barrier wasn't running around, I think just that flexibility from the Pure Chimera deck makes the Pure version a lot better than the Branded version. But I just don't think, even with a good pilot, this deck's going to see really any success. Especially with the Fiendsmith cards coming out, that just gives the deck a lot more flexibility going into Beatrice, but also being able to bait out interactions that would in turn hurt the Chimera part of the deck. Then we have Sky Strikers, who are getting support in the Terminal Revenge. Sky Striker, again, is another fan favorite deck, and I think this deck will be seeing play at least once Terminal Revenge releases. I just don't think the support's enough for what's coming out in Infinite Forbidden specifically. So I think the support will cause it to see success pre-Infinite Forbidden, but it'll see some success, you know, once the support comes out in Terminal Revenge. And I don't have Ice Barrier on here or Infernoids, because I think the Infernoids will see success in Snake Eyes specifically once Terminal Revenge comes out, but once the Fiendsmith comes out, it'll kind of become irrelevant. And then we have Dragon Link, a deck that truly just won't die. Dragon Link is primarily Bestials at this point. It is just Bestial Dragon Link, essentially, and we are in a format ruled by fire at the moment, meaning that unless you're playing against like Branded or Chimera, the Bestials aren't doing a whole lot other than banishing your own resources. Now, I do want to go by saying that Bestials in the side deck are a very, very popular option, and even Tenpai is running Magnuma in the main. But the reason they're so good on the side is because they're very match dependent. Voiceless Voice hates it when you banish their low from the graveyard. Snake Eyes hates it when you banish their IP from the graveyard. So, you know, the Bestials come in handy, but having 13 of them in your main deck isn't really a good choice. Now, I do think Dragon Link, because Dragon Link players are so stubborn, they will bring it to Nationals and they will try, especially since it won Worlds last year. But I think with just all the past hits and just where the format has kind of changed to, Dragon Link is going to see a lot less success this time around. And that's really all I have for you guys today. So let me know in the comments below if I missed a deck that you think should have been on this list, whether even if it's in the struggle bus category, just let me know. But also just let me know what you think of this tier list, if you think a deck is poorly placed or if a deck should probably have been talked about a little bit more in depth to kind of explain why it's going to see the success that it's going to see. But also make sure you leave a like on this video and subscribe if you're not already and you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content. But with that, I'll see you all in the next video. See ya.